Swanson Chicken Broth. The carton, not the can, is the first thing most home cooks reach for the moment a recipe calls for stock. And the first time I turned that carton around in my own kitchen and read every word on the back, one number stopped me cold. 860 milligrams of sodium in 1 cup, before you have added a single pinch of salt to the pot yourself. I lined up 3 broths from 3 different companies on my counter this week: Swanson, Campbell's, and one you may not reach for quite as often, Pacific Foods. I read every ingredient on every carton out loud before I wrote a single word of this script, the way I was taught to read anything before I trusted it. One of these labels is nearly plain. One of them carries an ingredient that most shoppers walk right past without knowing what it does. And one of them, by the end of this, I am going to tell you exactly why I would leave sitting on the shelf. I learned to judge food before I learned to judge anything else. That part of me never left. So hold on to that number, 860, because by the time we get to the end of this list, you are going to understand exactly why it matters and which carton in this lineup actually earns a place in your pantry. Before I go any further, tell me something. Which of these 3 broths is already sitting in your kitchen right now? Swanson, Campbell's, or Pacific Foods? Type the brand in the comments before you watch the rest of this. I want to see how close my guess is. And I have a guess. Broth is the one ingredient almost nobody thinks to question. It goes into the soup pot, the rice, the gravy, the mashed potatoes. And most cooks treat it like water with a little more character. Something bland and background, not something carrying its own decisions in every batch. But broth carries more sodium per cup than almost anything else quietly poured into a pot, because salt in a shelf-stable liquid is not only there for flavour, it is there to help the product survive a truck, a warehouse, and close to 2 years on a shelf before anyone opens it. That means the broth you choose sets your sodium for the whole day before you have seasoned a single thing you are cooking. A woman who watches her salt shaker carefully at the table can still land over her limit for the day from the broth alone and never know it, because nobody turns that carton around. I did not know to look either, once. Read that again, because that one sentence is the reason this entire video exists. Growing up, the only broth in our house was whatever sat in the pot after Sunday's chicken had been picked apart for supper. Nobody measured the sodium in that, because nobody needed to. It was mostly water, bone, and thyme, with salt added a pinch at a time by a hand that tasted as it went. The first grocery store carton I ever bought on my own, after I left, I assumed worked the same way. It does not. A carton has to survive months sitting in a warehouse before anyone tastes it, and that changes what goes into it long before it ever reaches your pot. Swanson Chicken Broth. This is what the ingredient list shows: chicken stock, salt, natural flavouring, chicken fat, yeast extract, carrot juice concentrate, celery juice concentrate, onion juice concentrate. Read that list twice because it is short, and every word on it is something you could point to and name. There is nothing hiding behind an ingredient you cannot picture in a kitchen. But the sodium tells its own story. 860 milligrams in a single cup. And if a recipe calls for 4 cups of broth, which most soups do, you have poured out more than half of a full day's sodium limit before you have salted anything else in that pot. I bought this exact carton for years before I ever flipped it around, because the front said natural, and in my head, natural meant modest. It does not mean modest. It means recognizable. My mother kept a broth going on the back of the stove for 2 days at a time, bones and vegetable ends and whatever was left from Sunday. Salt went in by hand, a pinch at a time, tasted and adjusted as it cooked down. Nobody in that kitchen was pouring from a carton that had already decided the salt for us. That is not a criticism of anyone reaching for a carton today. Most of us do not have 2 days to give a pot of bones. It is only to say that convenience and a hand on the salt shaker are 2 different things. And a carton like this one has already made that choice for you before you opened the lid. Here is my honest verdict on the regular Swanson carton. The ingredients are honest, every one of them plain and recognizable. The sodium is not modest, and it is not disclosed anywhere on the front of the box, only on the back, in the place fewest people look. That is not a broth for someone watching salt closely, and it is not the broth I would grab first if a lower sodium option from the very same company is sitting 2 shelves over. Do you check that number before you buy, or do you trust the word natural on the front and stop reading right there? Tell me honestly, because I used to be the second kind of shopper, and it took me years outside that community to unlearn it. The company also sells a carton with 1/3 less sodium and one with almost none at all. And I am coming back to both of those before this is over, because the most surprising part of this whole comparison is not the regular carton. It is what sits 2 shelves over from it, under the exact same brand name. Campbell's Condensed Chicken Broth is next, and this is the one I want you to lean in for. This is what the ingredient list shows. Chicken stock. Then, under 2% of the total, chicken fat, salt, yeast extract, monosodium glutamate, corn oil, natural flavoring, soy protein concentrate, dried chicken, and celery extract. Read that again. Monosodium glutamate, sitting plainly in the middle of a list that most people scan for maybe 3 seconds before the can goes in the cart. I am not going to tell you monosodium glutamate is dangerous, because I have not verified that claim myself, and I will not say something on this channel I cannot stand behind with my own eyes and my own reading. What I will tell you, plainly, is that it is a flavour enhancer, added on purpose to make a thinner broth taste like it is carrying more than it actually is. Corn oil and soy protein concentrate are doing quiet work of their own in that same can, one for mouthfeel, one for body, inside a product that started at its base as chicken stock and not a great deal more. My mother's pantry in Holmes County never held a can that looked like this one. We simmered bones on the stove until the whole house smelled like it for the better part of 2 days, and whatever body that broth carried came from time on the burner, not from an ingredient with 3 names stacked on top of one another on a label. That is, the whole label, once you strip away the picture on the front of the can. Chicken stock, stretched, flavoured, and thickened until it tastes like considerably more than what actually went into the pot. Here is my honest verdict. This is not a dishonest can. Every ingredient is listed, plainly, exactly where the law requires a company to list it. But it is a broth built to taste rich rather than to be simple. And if simple is what you are after in your own kitchen, this is not the can I would reach for. What word would you actually look for on your own can tonight if you turned it over right now? The ingredient list or the calorie count on the front? Because those 2 numbers answer very different questions, and only one of them tells you what is really inside. I bought this exact brand for years before I understood what half of those words on the back even meant. Nobody in the community ever taught me the term soy protein concentrate, because nobody in the community ever needed to. Out here, Reading that word became part of how I judged whether a can deserved a place in my cart. The same way I once judged whether a jar of preserves had been sealed properly before my mother would trust it through winter. If you are the kind of cook who turns the can around before it goes in the cart, this channel is built for you. I am not here to sell you a diet or a lifestyle, and I am not here to tell you what to eat tonight. I am here to read labels the way I was taught to read anything that was going into a pot in my mother's kitchen. Plainly, out loud if it helps, and without flinching from a word I do not recognize. Stay with me, because the next carton on my counter is the one that actually surprised me the most out of all 4 I am covering today. Before I go further, I want to be fair about something, because a fair fight earns more trust than a takedown with nothing good said about anyone. Ingredient lists change. A company can reformulate a broth between the day I read a label and the day you pick up that same carton next month. And where you live changes what is even on the shelf in front of you. A carton common in Ohio may not be the one stocked in your part of the country at all. I am telling you what these labels show today, on the cartons in front of me. Turn your own carton around before you trust my word over the print sitting right in your hand. That habit will serve you a great deal longer than any single video I make. Now for the carton I promised you at the very start of this, the one that changed what actually sits in my own cart today. Swanson's own lower sodium carton is the first place I would send you if you already trust this brand and do not want to abandon it. 570 milligrams of sodium per cup against the 860 milligrams in the regular carton. And the ingredient list barely moves. Chicken stock, salt, natural flavouring, chicken fat, yeast extract, and the same 3 vegetable juice concentrates as before. Nothing new was added to hide the difference between the 2 cartons. The company simply used less salt and left the rest of the recipe alone. That is not a redesigned product wearing a healthier label. That is the same broth with the sodium turned down. And if loyalty to this name matters to you, this is the version I would actually let into your pantry. Swanson's unsalted carton goes further still. 35 milligrams of sodium in a full cup. And what little is there occurs naturally in the chicken itself, not added with a shaker at the factory. This is the carton I reach for when I want to control the salt in a dish myself, the way I was taught to season a pot before I had ever seen a nutrition label in my life. It tastes flatter straight out of the carton, and it should. You are meant to season it yourself at the stove, not trust a factory somewhere to have already decided how salty your dinner needs to be. Do you season your own pot from a blank broth like that? Or do you let the carton make that decision for you, before the lid even comes off? It is worth asking yourself honestly, because the answer changes which of these 4 cartons actually belongs in your cart. Pacific Foods Organic Chicken Broth is the 3rd recommendation, and I will be honest with you. This is the one I did not expect to end up preferring as much as I do. This is what the ingredient list shows. Organic chicken broth, organic chicken flavour, sea salt, organic onion powder, organic turmeric extract, organic rosemary extract. 6 ingredients. Every single one of them a word you could find in a spice cabinet or a kitchen garden, not a laboratory. Sea salt sits 3rd on that list, not 1st. And where an ingredient sits in that order tells you something real about how the recipe was built, long before you ever look at a milligram count. Pacific Foods also sells a low-sodium organic version of the same broth, and the company's own published numbers put it between 0 and 140 milligrams of sodium per serving, depending on the batch. About as close to a broth simmered by hand as anything I have found coming out of a carton on a regular grocery shelf. I haven't bought a jar of bouillon cubes since I left the community, and cartons like this one are exactly why. This is what a broth looks like when a company trusts the chicken itself to carry the flavour, instead of leaning on the salt shaker to do that work for it. Here is my honest verdict on Pacific Foods. 6 ingredients, every one plain, sea salt listed third instead of first, and a low-sodium version sitting right beside it on the same shelf for anyone who wants to go even further. That is not a marketing claim. That is the whole label. And it holds up exactly the way I want a label to hold up before I trust it in my own kitchen. When I first turned this carton over, I expected the same trick I found on the Campbell's can, a flavour enhancer hiding somewhere past the second or third word, doing the work that thyme and a real chicken should be doing instead. It was not there. I read that ingredient list 3 times over before I believed it, the same way I once checked a sealed jar of preserves twice before I would trust it through a whole winter. Have you ever picked up a carton expecting the worst and been surprised by how short the list actually was? That moment is worth paying attention to, because it usually means a company built the recipe around the food first and the marketing second. Here is the larger principle underneath all 4 of these cartons. A broth is not good or bad because of the name printed across the front, and it is not good or bad because of the price sticker on the shelf below it. It is good or bad because of what is listed, in order, on the back, in the exact sequence the company chose to put it there. Learn to read that order once, carefully, and you will never need a stranger on a video like this one to tell you which carton belongs in your cart again. Here is your homework before you close this video. Go to your own pantry tonight and turn over whichever one of these 3 brands is already sitting on your shelf. Read me the second ingredient, right after chicken stock, down in the comments. I want to see how many of you are holding the carton I would leave behind, and how many of you already found your way, without knowing it, to the one I would not. So there is your 860 milligrams, the number I asked you to hold on to at the very start of this, sitting quietly in the regular Swanson carton, sitting in nearly every pantry in this country right now. And there is the carton I promised you, the one that surprised me most of all 4. Pacific Foods, sea salt, third on the list instead of first. 6 ingredients instead of 10. Buy the carton that tells you the truth in 6 words, rather than the one that needs 10 words and a flavour enhancer to get there. That is my honest verdict, and I am not changing it.